Monday Night Pod, Tyler Fensky, talking about David's sin out of Psalm 51, building off of part 1 from last week.
Yeah, last week we discussed David was in a spot where he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. There was a time in the spring where kings were supposed to be out at war, and David was not. And one of the consequences of that was he ran into this temptation of seeing Bathsheba, a married woman, out and about bathing, and gets the temptation to go out and sleep with her, and acts out upon that, and leads to a whole bunch of issues because, as we found out in verse 5, she's pregnant.
Yeah, we talked about the dynamic of where he's just presented with whether he's going to follow what the flesh wants him to do or what the Lord is calling him to do, which is just to stop and walk away. Unfortunately, he doesn't do that. And now he's dealing with the consequences of where this sin is going to take him where he never thought it would go. And that is the nature of sin. You know, like it tells you in Numbers, be sure your sin will find you out. You know, that's Numbers 32:23. But the Lord references that as well in Luke chapter 12, where the Lord says, you know what, there's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. So it's that aspect of, you know, we make that wrong decision and we sin against the Lord, and we think it's going to just stay there. We think it's going to be hidden, and it always comes to light, and it always becomes more than we ever thought, because sin just compounds itself and takes you to places where you did not think that it would go, starting with right away where it's I am pregnant. You know, but even if, like we covered tonight, even if that had not happened, let's say that she didn't get pregnant, you're still just dealing with the dynamic of this guilt that's going to weigh over you. Where is she going to tell Uriah? When does she tell Uriah? What is he going to do about this? And that's where, you know, where Proverbs says that, can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. So if you commit this sin of adultery, no matter what, there's going to come consequences with that. Same chapter of Proverbs here. This is chapter 7:32. But a man who commits adultery lacks judgment. Whoever does so destroys himself.
Correct. So David's at the spot where he has to deal with the guilt of committing this act, and he goes into problem solve mode. Starts here this is 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 6. Moving forward, it says, so David sent this word to Joab. This is after he finds out that Bathsheba's pregnant. He says, send me Uriah the Hittite. Now, just for recap, Uriah the Hittite, that's the husband of Bathsheba, right? So it says, and Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. It says, then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, did not go down to his house. So we see the aspect of here, David all of a sudden starts to try to play God in his own life and eradicate the consequences that are happening for him. So he goes from a Christian who originally starts out under grace and has the Lord behind him and blessing everything that he's doing. All of a sudden he commits this sin and doesn't confess it. You start to see David become under judgment and have to deal with the consequences for that.
Yeah, exactly. And to clarify what Tyler's saying there, this is not a judicial judgment. Mm-hmm. So whatever sins that you have committed in your life, Jesus Christ has bled and died for them, and your sins are forgiven. What Tyler is saying is from 1 John, where it talks about the dynamic of confessing sins, and that if you are a Christian with unconfessed sin, now you are a Christian under judgment. Whereas it says in Corinthians, but if we judge ourselves, we will not come under judgment. So if you do not judge yourself and confess your sin, now the Lord's going to judge you. And that is a place of misery and frustration, because like Tyler's saying, he's trying to now play God here, manipulate everything, where he's trying to get out of the consequences of his sin by, obviously the plan being, well, bring Uriah in from the battle that he was supposed to be at. where he was supposed to be. Now he's going to call Uriah back and get Uriah to sleep with his wife and then think that it is his kid and try to get out of it that way. We talked about just when he was in that verse 3 situation where it said, isn't this Bathsheba the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite? What could he have done to just not even have to deal with any of this, to just walk away? Because we talked about where 1 Corinthians 6, it says to flee from sexual immorality. Mm-hmm. And Matthew 5 tells you to gouge your eyes out. Not literally, but gouging your eyes out meaning just remove yourself from that situation, get away from it. And one of the kids said tonight, yeah, he could have just gone to war. Correct. Exactly right, where he should have been the whole time. He should have been like, all right, I'm just getting myself into a whole lot of trouble here. I'm going to pack my stuff and go where I'm supposed to be and get out of this. But he didn't make this decision, and now it's starting to snowball on him because the plan is, all right, we're going to get Uriah back and get Uriah to sleep with her, and now he'll think that it's his kid and he can avoid the consequences. So verse 10 though, so verse 9, but Uriah slept at the entrance of the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. Verse 10, when David was told Uriah did not go home, he asked him, haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home? Verse 11, Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. He is in integrity. He is what David is supposed to be doing. He is how David is supposed to be acting. Where Uriah is out on the battlefield and he's saying, no, everybody is out there, sleeping on the dirt, hooking and jabbing every day, fighting these battles day after day, fighting this war. How am I just going to lay up in the house, eat, drink, and lie with my wife? What David had been doing instead of going to war. So Uriah is literally mirroring what David was supposed to have been doing in terms of just integrity and faithfulness, demonstrating fruits of the Spirit from Galatians 5, just the fruit of the Spirit of being faithful.
Yeah, you see the consequences for that once David slips on that discipline. One of the prerequisites for good leadership is you're supposed to be above reproach. And so as long as David was above reproach, you see all these things going his way and all this success being given to Israel, right? Moment he's out of that and he passes all the stop signs of that should have been in his face to provoke him to go to war, to provoke him to his purpose, to provoke him to be where he was supposed to be and, fulfill what he was called to do in that season of his life. In that season of his life, he was called to be at war. What could have been a great red flag, Bathsheba's out there naked, I'm about to make this decision to sleep with a married woman, the married woman of a dude I know, a respected man I know. Instead of that, he blows through the stop signs. Now he's at this place where he's being confronted by Uriah, who is real.
Yeah.
That also could have been a stop sign. It could have been a stop sign to where I say, okay, he's being real, a wake-up call that I need to be real. And instead of judging himself and humbling himself unto that, even at this point, even after the damage had been done, he still tries to go ahead and force the issue going forward.
Yeah. I've never thought about that until what you just said. That he could have been convicted by what Uriah said and even then confessed. Where it doesn't go to the point where it's about to go now, where verse 12, it says, then David said to him, stay here one more day and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. That's an important point in the sequence. We covered this tonight, but it's like we talked about just some of the neurochemistry last week behind this, right? We talked about the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. David sees Bathsheba. Now he's, limbic system is firing and it's overpowering the prefrontal cortex. What limbic system, what the Bible would call the flesh. And now he's on that just back and forth of, is he going to reason, logic, judgment, prefrontal cortex, and follow through on what the Lord is telling him to do, which is do not commit adultery with this woman? Or is he going to follow through on his flesh, limbic system, and just act on impulse? Mm-hmm. And now you see that where he's now going to try to manipulate Uriah with, that's how alcohol works, right? Alcohol really fires the limbic system. So that's why it's such a trigger for poor sexual behavior, is because it lowers your self-control. It lowers those just stop signs and caution signs, and causes people to, just get into behavior that they would never do when they're sober. And so David's trying to manipulate him here by getting him drunk. But here's a key point. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat. Went out to sleep on his mat. So Uriah had a plan where he was going to stay faithful here. He brought his mat with him. That was the plan. So Uriah couldn't control the circumstances of the king orders him back from the battlefield. Couldn't control the circumstances of David is making him drunk. But because he had a plan in place there, he brought his mat. He still followed through on staying in integrity and staying faithful. And you see why Uriah was one of the best 37 men in this army that was the baddest army on earth at the time. Is because you see that discipline, you see that consistency, you see that faithfulness. You see where he's like, no matter what, this is what I'm going to follow through on, and I'm going to bring my mat with me. I have a plan.
Yeah, that's one of the saddest parts of this story is Uriah was in such an integrity and how things still ended up going for him. You realize what David's responses could have been. He blows past the warning signs. He blows past, just the fact of trying to cover it up. One point about trying to cover your sin up is that you are not God. And no matter how smart you think you are, no matter how much control and power you think you have, your sin always finds a way to find you out, right? And so it's a temptation. What did Adam and Eve do as soon as they sinned? They tried to cover up, right? Yeah. They tried to hide. You don't want people to know. There's shame about it. There's guilt about it. One of the worst things you could do to cover up, because in that process of covering up, he takes it to the nth degree and takes him way further than what it could have been, what it should have been, right? And so I see this, and I see how Uriah was in such integrity. He had his own mat. He had a plan. David could have had the same plan. All the things we could have and should have done if we would have just thought ahead, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a huge takeaway for me. To make it even worse, it seems like David gets a little bitter about this response. You're king. You're used to everyone doing exactly what you want to do, exactly how you say it. Mm-hmm. And Uriah's not really following along with your plan and your wisdom, right? And so instead of whatever options there could have been to resolve this, right, given the messy situation he was in, he takes it even further. And it seemed, you made a great point tonight. It seems to get a little bitter going forward.
Yeah, it just keeps compounding.
Yeah.
Like we're saying at the beginning, where, it takes him to a place that he never thought he would go. He chose that just transient euphoric feeling, because that should not be missed. It's not like this didn't feel good for him to sleep with Bathsheba. Mm-hmm. He wanted this. He gets it. Sure, that felt good in the moment, right? But now here's all the consequences that come along with it. And here's all the pain that's now going to come from choosing that temporary feeling. And I read this as this verse 15, where I read it as he's a little angry, he's a little bitter, because it says in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. So he's going to kill him with the sword of the Ammonites. And all the points that this could have stopped, you even brought that up tonight. Like I said, I'd never even thought about that, of the different times that it could have been, cut off before the point of now he's going to have the man killed to try to cover up this sin. But it's just such a sad story here. And you made a point to me about just seeking the Lord with this. Where's the Lord in this, right? In terms of David. Yeah.
One of the things that sticks out to me about David, the Lord calls him a man after his own heart. Mm-hmm. We know from Psalm 1 that David meditates on the word day and night. Mm-hmm. This is a man, he's close with God, and the Lord's hand is all over David's life. And so it kind of shows, and it shows the nature of man is, and I reference Adam and Eve. It's like you could be walking with the Lord and things going well and you're in step, and all of a sudden you just get the least bit laxed to where you either lose discipline or you're not integrity, whatever way you want to put it, whatever that looks like. All of a sudden it's like you have this hiccup, and this was a big mess up for sure. And we understand why he did it. He's a human being. Where was the confession?
Yep.
Where was the prayer? Where was the Lord? What should I do? Because we know David asked the Lord for guidance on the battlefield when his life was up against it, when he was in fight or flight. Where was the seeking out the Lord of, okay, I messed up. The difference between him taking it into his own hands and the destruction that follows compared to, and this is just my takeaway of it, whenever I have my moments, how quick do I take him to the Lord? Do I try to cover them up myself, or do I just own it and say, Lord, just be with me in this? What should I do? Yeah. I've messed up. I'm wrong. It happened so quick I didn't even think about it, right? Because we talk about the part of the brain, the limbic system took over. I didn't even think about it. It got to the point, should I have been in this situation? I didn't even think about it. And it happened. And here's the consequences. Lord, what do I do now? Well, one of the things that sticks out to me, here's all the things that David did to try to fix it. Not once is the Lord mentioned in this section. Not once does it mention that David took this in prayer. Yeah. Or asked for guidance. Not once.
Yes, it's a good point. You wonder how was his prayer times, quiet times going? Was that occurring? I think that's the cycle of just shame that people can get stuck in. I've certainly been guilty of that myself, where it's like if you got sin that's lodged in, it's unconfessed sin, you almost feel then you're almost trying to avoid maybe the conviction that would come with fellowship, coming to Bible study, or, good church, or just your readings or prayer, where the Holy Spirit's getting your attention on that. So it's such a good point there. It's like what was happening there, what was going on, was this just, this is not taking place.
And real quick, I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do,
no.
To take it to the Lord. By no means is it easy to just take it to the Lord after you mess up bad. But the point is it the right thing to do? And was that the best thing that David could have done? That's what I wonder.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that, this story just, it keeps compounding for him in the worst way, right? So he sends this message with him. It says, so while Joab had the city under siege, this is verse 16, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. And then verse 26 says, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. And that's where you're going to see the Lord's judgment against David, because that, as we'll talk about next week, that's what you have, that if you do not judge yourself, we talk about just the absence of confession going on here, the absence of judging himself on this. And now this sin has just gone just so far beyond as he tries to manipulate this situation. And now the Lord is going to judge him.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind with this is, don't ever think that your sin just affects you. Okay? This one moment where David is human and falls short not only affects him, it affects Bathsheba, it affects to a certain degree, all of Israel. Right? It affects the army. It affects the men in the army. It puts Joab in a tough position. It costs Uriah his life. We'll find out later. It costs the baby its life. There's all this destruction that goes on because of one action, right? One poor choice. And that's something to keep in mind, is that whenever you're up against temptation, realize it's not just you that has to deal with the consequences, right? Your decisions affect endless amounts of people that you don't even know.
Ripple effect.
There's a huge ripple effect. Think about one accident on the freeway. Not only does it affect that person or the multiple people involved in the actual accident, all of a sudden there's traffic for hours hindering other people from getting to where they want to go, right? So I read this and I think of, there's so many takeaways. All the destruction and all the compounding, that's just the nature of sin in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's why God hates sin.
Yes.
So much. It's like you get this, Satan tells you this lie that God's this like angry, school teacher that's saying, now, don't do that, trying to keep you from fun. That's written on the wall at Harvard Law School, but it says, the law is the wise restraints that set men free. It's like, if you don't have those parameters around, it becomes misery. Think about like a football game, and if you didn't have 4 downs and you didn't have sidelines and all the things in place that allow the game to actually be fun. And it's like, that's a microcosm of life, where it's like, if we have those rules in place, that's what allows us to be free. But when we're living contrary to God's law, that's where we create so much pain, like you're saying, not just for ourselves, but for others. And that's where it's such a hard thing, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We all sin in many ways. And we were just talking about hypocrisy a few weeks ago, and being the one that, is always, looking at other people's sin and looking down on them and can't see your own. But within that context, the Lord is always, is calling us to become that better version of ourselves that is following the commandments of love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Because if you are doing those things, now it's like life is so much better. It's not all this pain that you're seeing here, and as we're going to see next week, compounds even more. Gets even worse. Just the ripple effect of it. Like I said, next week we'll get into that more with just chapter 12 here of what is God's judgment to David and the full consequences that came along with this action. Monday Night Pod, Tyler and Fetsky.